Okay, thanks everyone. This has been really good for me to hear everyone's information and stories, because at different stages of building my business, and actually right now I had some conversations with a computer programmer this morning about traceability, so I'm taking notes about what should we include and all that stuff. It's really interesting. Should do this more often to be proactive in education. So a little bit about me. So 2 years ago I started Afishionado, and I did my undergraduate at Dalhousie, and then after having graduated here in biology and international development studies, started traveling a lot. I did a couple of CETA internships. I started my master's in France and Norway, and my project is based on food security in Sri Lanka. So I was away from Canada for about 5 years, and I came back to Nova Scotia and started working with the Provincial Department of Fisheries, and Provincial Department of Agriculture, sorry, in a business development role. So we were working with small-scale agricultural producers around innovation within Nova Scotia for that commodity. So I was working with a lot of blueberry growers and vegetable growers. And consistently, as we were trying to market more in Nova Scotia and market Nova Scotian products outside of Nova Scotia, it was such a gap to me of why weren't we telling the stories within our own region about the biggest food export that we have in Nova Scotia, which is fisheries. And for me, how do you incentivize any of the change that we require to see less overfishing, to see more sustainable aquaculture operations? And there's two incentives. It's either economic or regulatory. And I think to a certain extent, economic ones aren't really working because the option to buy something cheaper is there, and because consumers are really confused, right? So, our seafood costs more. We're only going to reach a certain number of people in Halifax. Is that going to really make a difference to the rest of sustainable fisheries in Canada? And I'm not sure. I think it needs to come to a regulatory barrier that stops either certain types of fishing practices or certain types of aquaculture practices. But in that kind of vein of consumers being super confused, by providing them with an option and an experience that provides more education, that we're building consumer constituents who can feed back into this regulatory process. And that is where I think the real change happens through my business, not from people actually participating in Catch of the Week, from restaurants buying from us. It's raising awareness that goes back into those regulatory processes that everyone else here today is talking about, that goes to make that longer term change. So a really big part of it for me was in education and telling these fishermen's and aquaculturalists stories, because they're kind of a silent part of our landscape in I think all of Atlantic Canada, not just Nova Scotia. Another thing that a bit shocked me was we were doing so much advocacy around workplace hazards and safeties within the agricultural community, and those conversations weren't happening in the public sphere around the dangers of fishing and practicing aquaculture, and that local food movement of people wanting to have a closer relationship with their farmer because of all the benefits that it brought to the farmer in terms of economic incentives, in terms of you having that traceability of knowing where your food comes from, was completely lost in the fishing world because the supply chains are so complex. And even within Nova Scotia, because everything gets exported straight to Boston, which is the biggest frustration that I have, we don't have that information as consumers to advocate around it. And I think for me, this also precipitated an interesting change in my business, this struggle in Nova Scotia of how conservative our fishing industry is. So a year and a half ago, I had a 6 days a week retail store in the North End, and we were basically rented space and had a fish counter within another shop, so it was a really low barrier way of getting into the market. After that, I kind of realized, okay, so the big problem here in Nova Scotia is that seafood is going round straight to Boston or to other markets that can absorb our seafood. So me being in a little retail shop in Halifax, where we have 60,000 people in Halifax, who, to be honest, don't care that much because everyone has an anecdotal story about my friend's cousin is a lobster fisherman, or fishes haddock or fishes halibut, and I can get it for like $2 a pound. So everyone has this idea in their mind that seafood should be really cheap here, which is difficult to build something different or a different kind of market around, where we do have quite a bit of illegal activity happening, because I think too the ability to buy and sell seafood is over-regulated within Nova Scotia. So it's created a black market because the barriers are so high and frankly ridiculous that people then do it illegally, which I think it's fair because we also don't really have an inspection system. But it leads to consumers thinking that our seafood here in Halifax should be cheap. So me having a 6-day-a-week retail shop, trying to have as much variety as possible in small quantities from the same suppliers, just realized it wasn't having the impact, and suppliers didn't really care that much if I'm buying 20 pounds of land-based farmed Atlantic salmon twice a week. You're just not as important as someone in Toronto who's buying 400 pounds because they're also trying to build new business models. So it's like, okay, how can we do this differently, still offer this high quality premium seafood to Nova Scotia consumers, but in a way that incorporates some technology, which is also a little bit foreign to Nova Scotia. So I started Catch of the Week, which brings that same type of seafood in a more concentrated way to Halifax consumers. So it's one type of fish every week, and it could be two options between if it's going to be shellfish and fish or just fish. And if you choose shellfish and fish, it alternates every week. But it's given me the ability to then buy in more volume and have more consistency and traceability, to be able to tell people a lot more information about where their seafood is coming from. It gives us opportunities to visit the places. This is a picture of a restaurant group that came to Sustainable Blue, the land-based Atlantic salmon farm, with me. So with our consumers and the restaurants that we deal with, it's about education. This is why you're choosing this type of seafood. This is how we can create a difference. We also host free workshops, you pay for the cost of the seafood, but free oyster shucking workshops. How do we get more people to eat more oysters? Because it's one of the most sustainable things we can eat, and people are a little bit intimidated by it, which is absolutely fair, but can we create a venue where people can utilize more of these types of seafoods? We're having a filleting course in 2 weeks, so people can get a little bit more comfortable around what to do and how to do it with different types of seafood. For Catch of the Week subscribers, we had a field trip to the Granborough Weir and doing some advocacy around bait fish. So we just added bait fish into Catch of the Week shares 1 week. Because it's not adding seafood for me that people that are lower trophic level, more sustainable, that generally go into the bait fishery. Someone's not going to show up at my shop and choose that to take home that night. So it doesn't give me any incentive as the business to go out and buy that if it's always a lost leader. But if we can introduce it to people for free, because they're already part of this program, and we add it, and then people are kind of forced to try it, consumers are really tricky because you're set in your ways. And especially in Atlantic Canada, when it's lobster, haddock, and halibut, there's a lot of other options out there that I think, as businesses go forward, we have some responsibility to do things differently, to take advantage of technology, to utilize some of the things around this confusion in seafood to the benefit of. Oh, you switched it up here. Oh, you clicked Afishionado. It's right here. It's the web page. Don't worry. Don't worry. Yes. So for me, this was an interesting evolution around how we do things in Nova Scotia, the regulatory climate that we have. For me, I can finish just briefly on an anecdote of one of my current regulatory challenges. Keeping seafood here, and how do we source out the type of supply that we want to see? So around hook and line ground fish, so cod, haddock, pollock. People fish it in Nova Scotia, but it just goes round right out of the province. And processors, again, for the same reason of volume, if I'm buying 200 pounds a week, don't really want to process it for me and don't want to make the investment in growing those types of markets because we're so small scale here. And because our regulatory climate has, for the past 30 years, encouraged the same players to be involved. So for the ground fishery, so a processing license for ground fish, for example, the province hasn't issued any new ones since 1992. Since the collapse of the cod fishery, there's been a moratorium on ground fishing licenses, and they can't move counties. So me in Halifax, who wants to get more hook and line haddock, has to convince a processor who does $50 million a year in sales to cut 200 pounds of ground fish for me every month. They're not going to do that. And they have no interest in growing those markets because everything is going just fine right now to Boston. You know, they're sending enough and they're making enough money. And that's the other thing too, is that it's a bit of a lucrative industry in Nova Scotia. It's not like the terrestrial agricultural system where we have a lot more work to do around livelihoods, but I think most livelihoods are fairly secured around fishing in Nova Scotia. So there's not that even economic incentive for people to do things differently. So how do you grow that market when Boston is taking so much fish, when our licensing and regulations are helping to keep the same way of fishing, the same type of processors? So it just requires us to be a lot smarter. Which is how I kind of also had to pivot my business in the same way that Nova Scotia is kind of so conservative and stuck in the same ways. I was like, how can we get around this and try to reach more people, try to reach more volumes, and try to grow this part of the market that currently, because of some licensing issues, it's impossible to do at scale. And so that's really the point, or I guess the difference in what I want to communicate is we can have eco-labels, we can have educational programs, it's awesome, but it needs to all feed back into regulatory changes too, to make these types of seafoods more available, and to just stop types of fishing and aquaculture that aren't going to contribute to us having a sustainable economy for 50, 100 years down the road. And currently that's the biggest struggle to innovation within our community, I think.
I raised your hand. You did very well. Time for questions, which is excellent. And that was actually fascinating to hear from someone who's working in the business and the struggles and challenges that you face. Where's your shop?
So I don't have people working on Saturdays, but otherwise it's just through this weekly subscription program.
Which out in BC, and I don't know about here in Nova Scotia, we have a lot of organic fruit and vegetable and produce, programs like that. But I haven't heard of any seafood ones out in the West Coast. What's that? Scuperado? Okay. Yeah. And is that in Vancouver or is that? Okay, on the Victoria side.
Yeah, look into them. I think they've reached Alberta, or maybe Saskatchewan as well. Yeah, they're a community-supported fishery. So sort of like Hana, you would make an order. You guys would choose sort of what products you want. You buy a share at the start of the year, and then the fishers kind of get that money up front. So different business model, but same idea, kind of. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you. So now we have about 15 minutes, depending on how hungry you are, to just open the floor to for questions to any representatives this morning. So
I have a bit of time or guilt for you, so I'm wondering if you wanted maybe to say what your last slide was about. What's next?
The future of seafood ?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Well, it's okay. I mean, just sort of observations is sort of. I think we talked about a lot of things, traceability and labeling, which can affect traces back to sort of human rights abuses. I was going to touch a little bit on what Hana and Matt talked about is sort of shifting away from, and actually Loren mentioned it as well, shifting away from just that ecological criteria and starting to incorporate things like social. So definitely here in Nova Scotia, you know, we see that issue of this huge vacuum. All of the seafood is exported, and it's not the small scale sustainable fishers that are being rewarded for their catch. It's typically the huge, large companies that are fishing offshore, huge vessels that are really benefiting from the system that's in place. So trying to figure out a way to incorporate social into, I guess Laura also mentioned that as sort of a struggle of the program, and I think that sort of after 10 years of this sustainability movement in seafood, we're going to start seeing traceability of that link to being able to talk more about social and making sure that there's, you know, the fisherman isn't just making some money, but he's making enough money and he's making a livable wage and contributing to a sustainable coastal community that is degrading the environment, so sort of a two-pronged approach. Yeah, and you know, these are public commodities, these are public goods, so we need to all be able to have access to them, which is definitely another challenge.
Go ahead.
Maybe for Laura, maybe for you, if you are, my husband actually just opened a pub at this one, so they haven't got down the road of sustainable seafood yet, they're just getting up and going. But would their suppliers have information on that, or would they have to outsource that to like a company like Sea Choice?
So, yes and no.
I mentioned it early on, and like, I couldn't talk about it.
So any restaurant that works with Oceanwise, we sort of evaluate their menu up front, sort of see what they're sourcing. Some of the options might already be sustainable choices, but in order to say that it's Oceanwise, you need to be a member of the Oceanwise program. And in that regard, we do have suppliers that aren't partners that you could source from. But in order for it to be sort of an Oceanwise product, we recommend certain Oceanwise suppliers. But if it's a restaurant and just sourcing from an Oceanwise supplier doesn't give that restaurant sort of the ability to use our eco label, the restaurant also needs to be a partner. Otherwise, you know, we actually get that happen a lot, especially out west where our program's really popular. You'll just have restaurants who will use the logo on their menu without being a partner in the program because they actually see a lot of value in our program. But if they're not a member, we don't actually know for sure that that is Oceanwise. So, yes.
Unfortunately, coming from the Oceanwise Atlantic Canada background, I don't think there are any suppliers in
There's very few.
Atlantic Canada, but working with suppliers is very frustrating and difficult, and a lot of times they don't divulge their information, where their seafood is coming from. But if you're a customer and you're purchasing seafood, like in large quantities, like a restaurant would, my best suggestion would be to take a look at either the Oceanwise website or the Sea Choice website, and take a look at sort of those super sustainable options, or the green or the Oceanwise ones, and when he's purchasing seafood, ask more information from the supplier as to, you know, how was it caught or where was it caught, and then you can type it in on the website, you know, he's looking for scallops, you can just type in scallops, and then he asks the supplier, where are they from? He says they're from Maine, and you look for Maine, and then he says, how were they caught? Dredge. Okay, that's a no, Lord, that's it.
Yeah, we supply to about 40 restaurants.
And Hana's an Oceanwise partner.
It's one of the growth.
As you were talking about that, it is a concern as, you know, business owner. I think it is valuable to have that on there. And I think more and more consumers are looking for that here. And there's a few, so.
It creates discussion too, especially having the logo on a menu. You're going out to have a good time to eat food. You're not preparing it, you're not sweating in your kitchen. Dealing with stinky fish, which a lot of people don't like dealing with fish, which is why they eat fish at restaurants. And then just even asking that question, like, why is there a smiling fish head next to the halibut?
you're only Nova Scotia now, right?
Well, we sell to restaurants in Newfoundland and Toronto as well.
Yeah,
So I represent, Sustainable Blue, the land-based fish farm, and a couple of others.
so are you looking to maybe expand more so, like to have more of a presence in other provinces, or just base it at Nova Scotia and work from there, so you think?
Yeah, I'd like to do Catch the Week in Truro and Moncton in the next year. Yeah. It's, the economic question is so hard, so the Sustainable Blue salmon costs double. And I need to come up with a video like what you have to explain the cost. It's so hard because we are so used to everything being cheap in other markets around Nova Scotia. I'm not sure how price sensitive they'll be because I'd like to expand, but I think we need to do some more market research before we decide to do that. But even restaurants have trouble absorbing that cost.
As a new restaurant.
Yeah.
So that sort of leads into my question, mostly for Colleen, in terms of farmed Atlantic salmon. I saw that big red line, big red fish, and so my question, there's two questions really. One is about the cost benefit of, because farmed salmon in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia particularly, that's a huge business. And it brings in a lot of, it employs people and it brings in a lot of money to the area. So what's that cost, right? You have to look at, say, you know you shouldn't be buying that, but it's employing and bringing in a lot of money, right?
I will rephrase and say, I'm not saying don't buy it, don't eat it, I'm saying it's the thing that we need to focus on to improve.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. Because one of the other
Which
things
can
is,
be done.
right, okay, so one of the other things one of the other part of my question is, I have no evidence of what I want to say, but has farm salmon increased people's awareness of eating more fish and the benefits of eating more fish? Because it's made it more affordable and people become more aware, and yes, it's pretty, it's pink, and, you know, I know they're using dyes, but, you know, so that, I don't know if anybody's ever asked that question, but it's a question to think about, right? Is it, you know, we're always saying, yes, buy sustainable, eat better food, but we've been trying to get people away from eating, you know, other kinds of protein, and fish is a good protein. Has farmed salmon increased that in our region or around the world? Right, so.
Democratization of a luxury good, right? So
Is it?
It absolutely is, and I think
It's a
that's
luxury good.
It's farm salmon is democratization of a luxury good, so
Right.
now more people
Yeah.
can afford to eat what.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing, like, so wild harvest sockeye salmon is 3 times as much as farmed Atlantic salmon. So in that way, it's an absolutely great thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, I said I had 2 things to say. My third thing is about aquaculture and integrated aquaculture. And is there a place in Sea Choice, Ocean Wise, any of those organizations that are promoting better seafood? Is there a place to say, is your aquaculture business integrated? Are you growing other things with your, you know, here's these big pens of salmon, when you can be also integrating with mussels and seaweed, and there's all kinds of ways to do that. Norway, long time ago, used to do a lot of integrated aquaculture. I don't know how much integrated aquaculture is done around the world now.
It's commercial with
Yeah, I think they're export. Let's see
Yeah.
if I.
So is that
I
another?
don't think there's there's definitely no seafood watch assessment. I don't, sort of echoing that, I don't think there's any operations sort of large enough yet.
No,
And
no.
I'm actually not familiar if all of them are sort of based on the same system, because so the way Seafood Watch conducts an assessment for aquaculture is, right now, it's very, well, it's either really broad, like all sort of close containment finfish, or it's very specific, like this one farm kind of thing. And the amount of work that goes into one assessment for sort of one practice could be a lot, right? So I don't think that there is an assessment for that yet, probably just because it's not big enough yet.
There's
No.
some like neat indoor hydroponic
Yeah.
facilities, like in Toronto, I worked a lot with different small scale facilities that were typically growing like tilapia and vegetables or
Vegetables, yeah.
stuff like that, which obviously is the best of all of the worlds, you know. I do want to say on hashtag ocean optimism, the big red, and really good point, Becky, that you know it's a staple of maritimers' diets. I've had conversations with people saying Atlantic salmon tastes so much better than Pacific salmon. I know, West Coast.
No way,
But you know, I was talking to a couple in Costco the other day, and they were saying that, you know, it's really a shame this GM salmon's been okayed by the government to be sold, and they're not going to label it, and they're like, now I'm going to be scared to eat Atlantic salmon. He's like, and I already know all the problems about open net pen aquaculture. There's one by my cottage, you know, South Shore, and but he's like, I'm still gonna eat it because I love it. I like it better. I know Pacific salmon's more ecologically friendly. We don't have that much access to it out here. I'm not gonna stop eating Atlantic salmon. So I think, I guess my slide didn't come through where one of the things that I think we need to focus on is those improvement projects. So aquaculture improvement or fisheries improvement projects where we're sort of raising the bar. And in terms of Atlantic Canada's open net pen Atlantic salmon, Seafood Watch just did a release a few months back, a new report, and they did Atlantic Canada and they did Maine. So Maine is 100% of the Northeast US production. Maine came out yellow and Canada came out red. And the main reasons for that was management. So very easily, the government switched their management in terms of monitoring escapes. So the threat to the endangered wild species is a really big one. Also use of pesticides and antibiotics in the systems that leach out into the environment was a big one. So it's not necessarily, don't quote me, farm salmon isn't the worst thing in the world. It's also better than eating beef.
Yeah.
But we could really easily make some changes that could bump those up and decrease the impact on the local environments and local waterways and watersheds, just by simple policy things like decreasing antibiotics and pesticides, decreasing the amount of fish in one pen at a time and concentration, cumulative effects of how many can be in one bay at the same time, and monitoring escapes. And the US has a great escape monitoring mechanism, so that they can trace back the escapes directly to what pen they came from, and then they can slap a fine on that pen. So there's an incentive to not do that. The US has something like 0.5% escapes, and Canada has something like 72% escapes. So it's management.
It's the big thing, sealing that up and not having it open, like if there's a way of just keeping it totally apart, I guess is what you're saying?
Yeah, so.
I'm going to,
Lunch discussions.
exactly, or the open space this afternoon, because
Okay.
I think far from answering questions here in the last session, we've certainly generated maybe a lot more questions, and people now are more informed and can, pursue some of those, and so maybe the open space would be a place to set up a table to continue this discussion. Just want to thank our 4 presenters this morning once more. And